So let's begin by davening that the schools of our learning should help to finally bring home all the rest of the hostages and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents and bring a speedy end to this war. And also be an Aliyat Neshama for my mother, Shamali Abbas.
Amen.
So the Mishnah, which you're probably familiar with, is this Mishnah in it's the end of the third chapter of Rosh Hashanah. And let's wait 1 second because Paul is just coming in. And in a way, it's kind of it's kind of bittersweet that I'm doing this because it was only earlier today that I thought maybe I should do something for Purim. But okay, I'll do something that's neither here nor there. Paul, hi.
Hi.
Hi. So,
Do you hear me?
yes,
Okay.
we're digressing for a moment. We're talking about birthdays and their significance, and I just mentioned there's a Yerushalmi in Rosh Hashanah, and it's on this Mishnah. So the Mishnah you see on the board, which is pretty well known. It was even made into a song. Vayak Asher Yarim Moshe Yadav V'Gavar Yisrael. Right, so this is in the war with Amalek. So I guess it's at least somewhat connected to Purim.
It's connected to Purim.
Because this is the war against Amalek, and of course that's part of the Purim story. This is the background to the Purim story, is the war against Amalek. So what did the Torah say? That when Moses raised his hands, then Israel would overcome Amalek, and but when his hands went down, then they would lose. So the Mishnah asks, is it that the hands of Moses make the war or break the war? An expression that we have in English that to make or break. Ela kol zman shayu Yisrael mistaklim k'lapei lama'ala u'mechavnin liban lavihen shebashamayim hayu mitgabrin. Rather, it's all the time that Israel was looking toward above and directing their hearts to their Father in heaven, they would overcome, right? They would win. And if not, meaning if not what?
If they were not looking at his raised hands,
And
they would not be prevailing.
so, but
Or no, and they would not be looking towards their Father in heaven. They would not prevail.
So that they weren't directing their hearts, right? They didn't have kavana to Hashem. So if they didn't, and it's the looking up is part of it, right? It's
Gesture of kavana.
So the idea is that it's not, it seems like some kind of a magic trick that Moshe raised his hands and they would win, and then his hands weren't able to stay up. They would fall. The Bnei Israel would fall. So what it's saying is that no, there was a deeper reason that Moses raised his hands in order that people would look up and direct their hearts to Hashem, and that's what made them win. But if they would be mesir da'atan, if they would interrupt their intentions toward the Kadosh Baruch Hu, then they would lose. So this is what the Yerushalmi says. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Amar Amalek koshfan haya mehaya oseh haya ma'amid b'nei adam b'yom genisia shelo lomar lo b'mhera adam nofel b'yom genisia shelo. So saying Amalek were sorcerers. They're kashfim from Kishuf. And so what did Amalek do? They would stand up to lead their war, people, the young Genesia Shalem, people on their birthday. To say, saying, they would say, Lo bin hera adam nofel b'yom Genesia Shalom. A person will not quickly fall on their birthday. And that's why, so that was what Amalek was doing. This indicates the idea that one's birthday gives you certain power because your stars are aligned on your birthday. That's the day that you were born. So Masa Moshe. So what did Moshe do? So in other words, what was he doing then? Raising his hands. He mixed up the constellations, the mazalot, and it was so the idea is that if it's on your birthday, the stars are aligned with you, and so you have extra power. Moshe knew this. He knew this was a trick that Amalek would use, and so what he did is he would raise his hands in order to manipulate the stars so that they wouldn't be aligned with the person in question, and then Israel could overcome them. And it brings a proof text. It's Hadidiktiv Shemash Yireach Hamadzula. Uktiv Natan Tahom Kolo Rom Yadehu Nasa. Rom Yadehu Nasa Natan Tahom Kolo. Right. So, not going into the proof texts. So this is the idea. So the Korban Ha'eda, who's an early, the Yerushalmi wasn't learned nearly as much in history as the Bavli, and there's no Rashi on Yerushalmi. And around I believe the Korban Ha'eda is around the 17th century, if I remember, maybe somewhere around there. And the Korban Ha'eda wrote a Rashi-like commentary. So it's one of the earlier commentaries we have on Yerushalmi, but it's late in Jewish history. So he just explains, Yoma milchama in Israel b'nei Adam shaya oto hayom yom ledato. Amalek would put up somebody in their war against Israel, somebody whose birthday it was, saying, Lo bin hera adam nizok b'yom moladto. The person does not quickly come to harm on the day of their birth. She'az hamazal asholet b'yom ahu ozer lo. Because that mazal, that constellation of stars, is what will rule over that day, and that's going to help him, because that was the day that saw him born. So obviously it's a good day for him. And Moshe Yerbevet HaMazal, Shelo Yishlot B'yom Ahu HaMazal Shemolad Bo B'yitul. And Moses mixed up the constellations so that it would not rule over that day, that Mazal, that this person was born, and then they would fall. So yeah, that's fine. So anyway, that's that's a little something. So what's interesting about this Ma'amar, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, is it seems at least to run counter, or at least not be in line with the Mishnah, right? The whole point of the Mishnah is that Moshe wasn't doing a magic trick. He was trying to get Bnei Israel to be mechaven libam lavihem shebashamayim. But here it seems maybe he was doing some, so we won't call it kishuf, but I'm not sure exactly what we would call it. But it was to counter kishuf, was to counter the magic that was being used by Amalek.
This is an emunat tefela, but אין מזל לישראל. You shouldn't talk about mazalot.
No, but that's the idea of Ein Mazal Yisrael doesn't mean that the idea of, right, so the Gemara says, and the Bavli says Ein Mazal Yisrael. What it means is that we are
That
not.
I shouldn't believe in the horoscope.
No, that's not what it means. What it means is that's not what it means. What it means is that all the nations, there's a notion that all of the nations have a certain mazal that is of particular help to them. And what was the idea of the mazal? The constellation of stars is that was their intermediary to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So each Am has had their own mazal. Every Am had their mazal, and the Bnei Israel has a direct connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So we don't have the intermediary of a mazal. That's what it means. Ein mazal Yisrael. We don't. So it's not that it's not a. The idea of that is not that it's an emunat tefila. I would say it's the hefech, but there is something to it. It's actually it's an important point. But we don't depend on mazalot because we don't have a mazal for that reason, because Kadosh Baruch Hu established a direct brit with us.
I thought it means that you don't believe in the mazalot.
No, that's not what it means. That's really not what it means. But there are differing opinions amongst Rishonim about how to relate to what we call astrology. This is a much wider discussion. I'm not especially expert on this, but it's clear. One thing I think I can say about it is until relatively recent times, maybe just like the last couple 100 years, there was not a distinction made between astronomy and astrology. We think of them as two completely different things. Astronomy, that's hard science, and astrology, this is, as you say, it's like a superstition. But the people who studied the stars, that was all bound together. In order to do astrology, you had to have a very in-depth knowledge of the way the stars move and the night sky and all of that. So there was no real distinction. What you made of it, of course, it varied. How you would interpret the stars and so forth. That would vary across time and place, right? Because people all over the world who maybe weren't even in contact with each other had some variation of this idea of astrology, this idea. But it's clear from some Rishonim that they very much believe that astrology was something real, but it may be, but depending on how it's used, it might be something that's restricted by halacha. Halacha will tell you that for this reason, like there's, right, the Torah forbids various forms of divination, and if astrology is also, or maybe even mainly, I'm not an expert in astrology, it's a form of divination, and you're not supposed to use forms of divination. And that's what the Torah means when it says, Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha. You should be Tamim, which unfortunately maybe in modern Hebrew just means that you should be naive, but that's not what it means in the Torah. It means that you should be you should be a Tamim means like wholeness. That is, you should have this whole and uninterrupted relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Divination is something where you're going around. You're not going straight to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. You're using other forms of nature that the Kadosh Baruch Hu created. You're using Kadosh Baruch Hu's creation in order to divine. the future. So we're supposed to be tamim, and we have to rely on the Kadosh Baruch Hu directly. In terms of how various Rishonim understood, and even Chazal understood astronomy or astrology, this is not going to be my topic of discussion today. I have a feeling that there must be a lot written on this, because it's, in modern times where astrology has largely been rejected because of its separation from astronomy, from what we consider to be a hard science. I think people went back and they looked and they thought, what do different people think? But it wasn't, as I say, it wasn't really necessarily something that was separate in people's minds. This idea, it was more of a question of, to what extent, as a believing Jew, are you supposed to relate to or believe in things that one might learn from astrology? But the idea that it exists and that it has real meaning, that was generally accepted to be true. So, what can I tell you? That's the little bit that I know, which is not that much. So now that we've done that, I'm going to switch to a regularly scheduled program. And we're going to continue on in the Gemara. And I was just saying, I actually prepared this, this next part of the Gemara. It must have been like a month ago that I prepared this. So you'll pardon me if I'm a little bit bumpy doing it, but we're going to push through and do what we can. So Michael Schwartz, why don't you read this? We're up to the next Mishnah, right? Mishachazo Bulmus.
Mi shachazu bulmus, ma'klin oto afilo devarim tamaim, ad shia oru anayv. Mi shenashku kelev shoteh, ein ma'klin oto mechatzer kaved shelo Rabbi Matia ben Charash Matir. Va'odom Rabbi Matir ben Charash, hachoshesh begrono, matlin lo sam b'toch pi b'shabbat. מפני שהוא ספק נפשות, and וכל ספק נפשות דוחה את השבת.
Okay, so stop here, and let's see what this is. Okay, so we're still this is a mission that we did quite a long time ago, and the mission is still dealing with the question of somebody who's sick on Yom HaKippurim. And so what does it say here? Mishachazo bulmus. What does that mean?
So one that is stricken by a disease known as bulmos, we feed him even tamei food, impure food, until his eyes are open or looking or not looking, but like light, full of light. I don't know. Yaoru.
So they light up.
Okay, lit up, light it up. That's it. Okay, one who's bitten by a rabid dog, we don't feed him machatzer kaved, the liver, shalo.
It's part of the liver.
Chatzer, a part of the liver, and Rabbi Matia ben Charash permits this. And furthermore, Amar Rabbi Matia ben Charash, that one who is choshesh begrono, some sort of problem in his throat, we put on him a drug. We put a drug inside his mouth on Shabbat, because there is a fear of dying, or not fear, doubt.
Choshesh. There is a fear.
Okay, and any doubt of the life pushes off Shabbat.
Okay, so what's a bull moose?
Come across that before. It's some sort of illness associated with eating.
Yeah, so it's from the same Greek root as a word that you probably know, bulimia.
Bulimia, yeah.
And Rashi explains, Mishachazo bulmus, choli ha'ochez machamat ra'avon. It's a sickness that takes on because of hunger. And Rashi describes the symptoms. Einav kehot, his eyes are dark or darkened. V'hu mesukan lamut, and he's in danger of dying. V'chushemarito chozeret biyadu shemitrapeh. So when his appearance returns, then we know that he's been healed. The Gemara will talk a little bit more about this idea of Yehu Einav and what exactly that means. But so here, so we understand why the Mishnah is talking about this, because we're talking about people who might be ill on Yom Kippur, and their illness might mean that they have to eat. And so it's giving us a very specific example. A person who has been overcome by bull moose on Yom Kippurim, we feed him even Dvarim Tmeim, or maybe not just Yom HaKippurim, right? Because what's the chidush here? We feed him Dvarim Tmeim. So it doesn't mean that we go out of our way to feed him Dvarim Tmeim. It says a few Dvarim Tmeim. What does that imply?
Even impure food, meaning that's all you have.
Right. Presumably, if that's all you have, or maybe there's another reason you would give him Dvarim Tmeim, even if you had other food.
Because that's what would help him heal.
Yeah, maybe there's specific foods that the doctor says he has to eat in order to be healed. And maybe those things are Dvarim Tmeim. And then we bring another example about the person who's bit by a rabid dog that seems to imply such a case, right? Because what's the case of someone who's bit by a rabid dog? We don't feed him. We don't feed who?
The person who's been bitten, the sick person.
Right. So we don't feed the sick person from the chatzer kaved of the dog, right? From this part of the liver of the dog. What's the implication? Why would I feed him from the chatzer kaved of this dog?
Presumably, that would be what would cure him.
Yeah, so the implication.
A bit like the hair of the dog that bit you.
Yeah. So the implication is that if you feed them from the chatzer kaved, that's something that would heal you from the bite of that dog. So Tanakama says Mishnah Shachol Kel Shotei Ein Machrin Otam Chatzer Kaved Shel. So why not? In other words, so what we understood is, by implication, it says you don't use it. The implication is that you would have certain reason to think that you should dafka feed him the chatzer kaved, and the reason presumably would be because that would be the proper refuah. So the Tanakh says, but nonetheless, you don't feed him that. Why is that? Why wouldn't you feed him that? If it's going to heal him, why wouldn't you give it to him?
He doesn't believe that it helps.
Yeah, so the simple reason is that the Tanakh doesn't think it helps, or Rashi says, just a little bit different than that. It says, "En ma'afiyun to mechatzer kaved shelo." Here, Paul, you can read the afal pi
Where?
over here. The af.
אין מאכילים מחצי הכבד שלו, ואף על פי שנוהגים הרופאים ברפואה זו אינה רפואה גמורה, להתיר לו איסור בהמה טמאה על כך. Well, if he was sure that it helps, I guess that he would allow it. But
Oh, so what is
probably
that?
it doesn't believe, so why eat from a behemat mea?
Right. So what's the point? The Tanakama started off by saying that somebody who has a bull moose, we give him even dvarim tmeim, right? Which would include the chatzer kaved of a dog, right? Any part of the dog is the dog is a behemat tmeya, so any part of the dog is going to be a davar tamei. But he says that's for the bull moose. If you have nothing else, then you can give him even dvarim tmeim. But in the case of the kelev shoteh, where yeshum hava amina, we have some reason to believe that the chatzer kaved might help him. Nonetheless, I don't give it to him now. But then Rabbi Matya ben Charash matir. Rabbi Matya ben Charash is matir. Why is he matir? Right, yeah, it's Paul. You can read Rabbi in Rashi. Rabbi Matya ben Charash.
כסבר, כקוף,
Yeah,
כסבר, should be כף לו, כסבר רפואה גמורה היא. Because he believes that it works.
he believes that it works. But here, so now, what's the problem though with this psak in the Mishnah? So the Mishnah is saying, according to the time, what's the problem with the Tanakama, and certainly the way Rashi is understanding? According to the Tanakama, I don't give the chatzer kaveh to someone who's bit by a rabid dog. According to Rashi, the reason is we're not certain that this is a refuah gemura. Even though doctors use this refuah, and not actually Rashi's language here is very carefully written. Eina refuah gemura lahatir lo. It's not an absolute refuah to the extent that I'm going to be matir, I'm going to allow him to eat from a behemat tameya. But what's our general rule if somebody whose life is in danger? And and Michael Schwartz just read it in the Mishnah, right? What's the klal?
Well, there's a safek. If the safek is about the medicine, not about the life.
Wait, so Paul, wait, you're jumping. First answer my question.
Okay.
What's the general rule? Safek
if the life is endangered, but you are not sure about it, then you should nevertheless, if it's necessary, you should go beyond the normal rules of the kashrut.
Okay, so
but here it's not, the safek is not about the life. Here the safek is about the medicine. If this medicine works or doesn't work.
Wait a second. Wait a second.
That's another safek.
Wait a second. Safek nefashot lahakel. Right. In case of where we're concerned of the cases of life and death, we're not sure what to do, or there is a safek. I should say there is a safek involved. Then safek nefashot lahakel. And what's the kula? The kula would mean that that you will violate other halachot in order even al safek to save this person's life. So until now, before this Mishnah, right? So what were the cases that we were talking about, safek nefashot, that we spent whatever the last couple of months on?
Someone that was ill from fasting on Yom Kippur.
Right, so we have the case of a person who's fasting on Yom Kippur. So we have an Isur D'Oraita of eating on Yom Kippur on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have a person who's ill, who even at this moment may not be deathly ill, right? But as we saw from the tour of later poskim, that if the doctor says that a person doesn't eat today on Yom Kippur, their situation might worsen. And as the later poskim said, "Be'ein sarich lomar shemi yamut." Not only his situation might worsen. Obviously, we don't have to say it's obvious that we'll be mekil if the doctor says that this person may die. So but the point is, even on a safek that's less than the immediate, less than having an immediate outcome of death, I will still make sure this person eats on Yom Kippur rather than risk his life. So that's for Yom Kippur. And then we also had earlier, just a second. Right, we had our Mishnah, right, the previous Mishnah, Ubra Shehiricha. So we had two cases. We had the Ubra Shehiricha, we had the pregnant woman who smelled something, and we feed her ad shetashiv nafsha. And then we had the case of the Choleh, Machilina Talpi Bikiyim. And here, the stam, the milta, right, the stam way we understood our Mishnah there and the Braita is that this is talking about Yom Kippur. It's talking about Yom Kippur. I'm sorry, in the Mishnah we thought it was talking about Yom Kippur, but in the Braita, and this is what I was looking for, the Braita starts off like this. Uba shericha basar kodesh or basar chazir. So what we pointed out, I think it was Michael Schwartz actually who pointed out, I remember he was Michael Werner, it was one of the Michaels, who pointed out, this is Lav Dafkan Yom Kippur, right? A woman who's pregnant, who smells basar kodesh, right? So this would be meat that's from a korban that she would not be allowed to eat. Or sort of the other end of that spectrum, basar chazir, right? Pig meat, which she's not allowed to eat for a different reason, but neither of these things, both of these things are asur for her to eat. So if she smells them, then the din is that we give it to her to eat. We don't give it to her immediately. We try to see if maybe just touching it to her lips or letting her suck on it a little bit. But ultimately, if she needs to, she can eat it. And that's even not on Yom Kippur, right? And why? Because it's safek nefashot. Safek nefashot lahakel. So, to Paul's point, though, Paul is saying, here also, what's the difference? Here, the Ubra Shehiricha first of all, as we pointed out at the time, this is not a person who is sick. This is it's a pregnant woman is its own category. So in the case of the woman who's pregnant, so we're afraid for her life and for the life of the child. And in such a case, the safek nefashot lahakel will kick in. So whatever it takes to keep them alive, afilu mishum safek, we don't know that this is going to cure her, but we know that this is what she is saying that she needs. And remember, this was maybe, I think, the last note that we ended on even last week, that halacha puts a great deal of emphasis on whatever the sick person, or I'd say in the case of the bara, right? Whatever the person in question, what they're telling us. Because I'll give a great deal of weight to the person in question whose life is in danger. So the person whose life is in danger, the assumption is throughout that we're dealing with people. First of all, we're dealing with people who are Yirei Hashem, right? They're dealing with people for whom eating things that are asur are that they really consider them to be asur, or eating on Yom Kippur is something they realize is asur. And so if they say they need to eat something, they may be telling us something that even a medical expert won't be able to tell us because of this idea, that right? There's this idea that people know what they need. Okay, so that's for the safek of the ubara, that she can eat things that are asur, even when it's not Yom Kippur. And now we come to our case of the person who's been bit by a rabid dog. So here, what's the implication? Here, it's not a case where the person says, in the case of the bull moose, or in the case of the person who's bit by a kalef shatan, it's not that this person is asking to eat particular things. It's that here it seems to be entirely coming from the side of the doctors, from the experts. So if a person has a pulmus, presumably because that's what presumably that this is a person that needs to eat, and that doctors say that he needs to eat whatever is there, maybe even dvarim tameim. But in the case of the kaloshoter, it's dafka davar tamei. But there are doctors who say you have to eat davar tamei, and so now this is to understand Rashi. So Rashi says he doesn't say it's an interesting language. Rashi doesn't say safek that it's not going to cure. He just says that it's not a refuah gemura. Now Rashi doesn't explain exactly what a refuah gemura is, but what will we understand the implication of Rashi is?
It's not necessarily going to work.
It's not necessarily going to work. In that case, where according to the Tanakama, if it's not a refuah gemura. It's not that the implication is not really that it's a safek. It's that we know that it's not a refuah gemura. So if it was on, I'm sorry, and again in this case, this is lav dafka on Yom Kippur, right? This could be any day of the week because the refuah is to give him something that's tamei to eat. In any event, but Rabbi Matya ben Charash says no, it is a refuah gemura. So it's an interesting machloket because the machloket seems to be about some kind of objective reality. We try to avoid that. We don't, but that's the pshuto shel inyan. We don't like to have a machloket where two people are looking at the same thing and say, one says it's this and one says it's that. But seems to be what's happening here. We have the Tanakama who says that Chatzer Kaved of the rabid dog is not refuah gemura, and Rabbi Mati ben Charash says it is refuah gemura. That's the way Rashi learns. All right, I want to keep that in mind, and I think we'll come back to this question about the nature of the machloket in a little while. Okay, so once we mentioned Rabbi Mati ben Charash, so then we have this other statement of Rabbi Mati ben Charash. He says, "Achoshesh bigrono." So somebody who has some kind of a feeling in their throat. So this also seems to point to what was known to be a particular kind of sickness. Choshesh bigrono. They had some kind of a feeling in their throat, and he says, "Mitilino sam betoch piv b'Shabbat." So we give him some kind of a medication. We put medication into his mouth on Shabbat. Why wouldn't we give him medication on Shabbat? Are you allowed to take medicine on Shabbat?
I thought in general, no.
In general, no, right? There are exceptions, and we mentioned this a while ago also when we were going through the Mishnah. And some also in the Gemara, but there's an idea. So if you take medication if the doctor says, right, we learned this before, if the doctor says that this person is in danger and it's Shabbat and he needs to take a certain medication for the next 8 days. So we don't say, well, Shabbat is almost over, let him take it on Motzei Shabbat. That way he'll only have to violate one Shabbat. Because I'll say, no, he takes it now because it's a fake nefasha. So on the basis of that, you can rule that people who have to take medication for chronic illness, they take it every day because that's part of what keeps them out of sakana. But otherwise, why would I think that I'm not allowed to take medication on Shabbat? Does anybody know what the reason is you're not supposed to take medication on Shabbat?
Yes, because we might end up be. It used to be that one would grind the medication before taking it.
Right.
And that's a malacha.
Right. So in other words, there's no din in the Torah that says you're not allowed to take medication on Shabbat. But it was a Gzerat Chachamim mishum shchikat samamanim. It was mishum that the way many medications were prepared is that you have to take herbs or sometimes minerals and grind them in order to make them into whatever, compound so that the person could swallow them, and that's how they would take it. Nowadays, that's done for us. Like if you're taking a pill, somebody did the grinding for you. That preparation was already done, but nonetheless, the Gzeirah still holds. Unless you're there are different categories. If you're a Cholesh v'sakana, Cholesh yesh v'sakana, and so forth. But stam de milta, you don't take medications on Shabbat, and so that's also the implication here in the Mishnah that Rabbi Mati ben Charash is saying. So a person who's choshesh bigrono, who the normal course of treating them would be to give them to give them some medication. In the case of choshesh bigrono, we do give them the sam on Shabbat. He's talking, right? He's switching to talking about Shabbat. Because of Safek Nefashot, v'chol Safek Nefashot doche et Shabbat. Okay, so now, Michael Warner, do you want to read or do you want to pass?
If you don't mind, I think I'm going to pass this time.
Okay, Michael Schwartz, Misha Nafla Alav Mapolet.
Misha nafla alav mipolet, sefek hu sham, sefek eno sham, sefek chai, sefek met, sefek nachri, sefek Israel, mafkichan, mipachin alav et hagal. Matsuhi chai, mifabchin, v'imet yenichuhu.
Okay, so
So if something falls on someone, a house or building falls on something, whether there's a doubt whether he's there or whether he's not there, whether he's alive or whether he's dead, whether the person is a non-Jew or a Jew, we like take apart not take apart, but remove the pile of rubble. If we find him alive, we continue to do it. And if we find him dead, then we just leave it.
just leave him. Okay. So first of all, why is the Mishnah bringing this issue of Misha Nafla Alav Mapolet now?
I think it's connected to the issue of Sefek Nefashot and Shabbat.
Okay, so this is where, so the Mishnah just said, Kol Safek Nefashot Dochet Shabbat. And now the Mishnah is telling us, so how does this idea of Safek Nefashot work? So it brings this classic example. This is the classic example of Safek Nefashot. Because, and why is it such a classic? Because you see, there are many, even when there are many Sfekot, we still will violate Shabbat. So let's go through this. Misha Nafla Alav Mapolet. So as Michael said, so this is a case where a mapolet fell. So it's a mapolet. It's really any kind of thing that falls. It could be like Michael said, it could be a structure that's now come apart and it falls. It could all, it could be a landslide, or it could be what do you call that when you have snow that comes down?
Avalanche.
It could be an avalanche. It could be something major that is that could kill somebody. And also cover them up at the same time, right? So they could obscure them and kill them, right? It could, in our day and age, God forbid, it could be, when a bomb falls on an area where a person is, and now there's a lot of rubble, and we have to see if they're, what to do. So we dig for them, right? So in all these cases, mefakchina lavet agal. So it literally means that we uncover, we reveal what's in the pile. So why is that? Why would I not do that on Shabbat? What's the isur that I'm overcoming here?
The rocks would be muksa.
So the rocks are, so there's at least one thing, which is that the rocks are muktzah.
I mean, the second thing is that one would presumably be carrying. If you're taking material.
Not necessarily, because what's the definition of carrying on Shabbat?
Actually going from one reshut to another. Okay, so.
Okay, well, so there's two possibilities. One is if you take something from one reshut to another reshut. What's the other case?
Or you're transporting something more than what is it 3 paces. I don't remember the.
And
I
then
do,
4 amot.
4 amot. Okay.
4 amot. If you're in Reshut Rabin and you move something, you carry something more than 4 amot within the Reshut Rabin, and technically it means it's something that you picked up and you transported across a certain distance and then you put it down. You have to have all those things. If you're just pushing rocks away from a site, then that wouldn't fall in either of those categories. But we have this idea that it could be that it's a problem of muktzah. And why are rocks muktzah on Shabbat?
They have no purpose.
Because they have no purpose. So unless it's a rock that you had set aside for a particular purpose before Shabbat, which could happen. You might need the rock for something. But otherwise, stam rocks or rubble, let's say, bricks or mortar or whatever, stam demilta, they're muktzah. The other possibility, depending on the configuration of this disaster, is if the person became buried in ground, right? Like maybe earth fell on this person. So then then in that case, you're not allowed to dig. You're not allowed to push aside dirt on Shabbat. That would be digging, and that would be a told of choresh, of plowing. That's why you're not allowed to dig earth on Shabbat. Now, there's a difference between saying it's mishum muktzah and mishum choresh, because muktzah is altogether zerah d'Rabbanan. But nonetheless, we're saying that for safek nefashot, you're allowed to not just here. It's not just that you're allowed to. Here? It's an imperative. Mifakhin alav et adam. Whatever the isur that's involved here, be it an issue of isur muktzah or isur of digging, mifakhin alav et adam. Whenever there's a safek, then you have to do what you can because of safek nefashot to try to save this person's life. So all of the sfekot we go through, right? So there's a safek whether or not he's there. So that you understand that could mean that maybe this person walked into a building and then the building collapsed, and we don't know if they're still in the building. Maybe they walked out the back and we didn't see them, or maybe they walked near, a landslide, then the landslide happened. But again, maybe he walked beyond it. We don't know. So in any case, safek husham, safek ein husham, we have to dig for him. Safek chai, safek met. So what does that imply? That we're past the safek of whether he's there or not. He's there. We know that in safek chai, safek met, it means we know he's there. We know he's in the mapolet. But now I just don't know if he's alive or dead. So outside that safek that he's still living, I continue to dig. Safek nochri, safek Yisrael. So what's the implication? That we're not mechalel Shabbat to save the life of a non-Jew on Shabbat. That's a little bit more, right, controversial. But here, let me just show you something. Bring it up quickly. I'm not sure if I'm gonna get it. All right, I'm gonna leave this issue of the Nachri aside because we'll come back to it. But for the moment, that's, this is the way This is the way it presents, right? The implication is suffix chai suffix mate. So again, if there's a doubt whether he's living or dead, you keep digging. So then when I get to suffix nachri, suffix Yisrael, what's the implication? That I know that there's a person there who's alive. And now my only suffix is whether they're a Jew or a non-Jew. So in all of those cases,
If you are sure that it's a non-Jew,
so what's the implication? If you're sure that it's a non-Jew, then what?
I understand that you shouldn't.
You don't continue to try to save them.
Yes, but you do it nevertheless.
Okay, so like I say, we'll come back to that. But just I'll say that will be easier to understand if it's not stam nachri, but if it's a novela avodah zarah. There are dinim about that, about avodah zarah. So since this came up, and since it's not the end of the year, but it's going to be the end of the year soon.
A Jew can also be available.
I want to, yes, a Jew can also be on avodah zarah. Absolutely. Beli Neder, I'm going to try to fill in some of the concepts that are surrounded, but we'll get them from elsewhere, not from this sugya. But there are dinim surrounding this question of how, to what extent do we the implication, what's the implication here? The implication is, if let's say what I'm saying is the understanding that Nachri here really means there are two possibilities. Either Nachri means anyone who's not Jewish, or it's specifically Oved Avodah Zarah, right? Those would be the two possibilities. In neither case, in the Mishnah, regardless of what Nachri means, we don't have license to kill somebody because they're not Jewish. We don't have a license to kill them. The question is, when we are confronted with saving their life, but the only way I can save their life is by violating an Isur Torah, is it better to Sheva al Ta'aseh, right? To not do anything, not actively killing them. But I don't necessarily have to, or maybe I'm not even supposed to violate Shabbat in order to save their life. So it's a complicated issue, and Beli Neder, I'll try to shine some more light on it next time. But for the moment, this is the implication, that if we see a Nachri, if after our digging, and we find out that there is a person there, and that person is still alive, but then we get to this point that the person is alive, but they're Nachri, then if he's dead, then I leave him for dead on Shabbat, which sounds very cruel. But as I say, I'll leave that for next time. But in terms of practical halacha, generally speaking, we are going to save that person's life, even if they're not Jewish. Mishum eva, because we're worried that if we don't, we will be afraid of a reprisal from the non-Jewish world. I may have told you this story, which I saw on the internet, but it was somebody who was writing about Rav Shaul Lieberman, who was, aside from being, a phenomenal Talmid Chacham and a rabbi, he was also a very well-known academic. And so he had academic friends who weren't Jewish. Sure, he had other friends who weren't Jewish in general. But one of his, as I recall, was an academic friend of his who understood there's this din about, ein mefakhin alav et hagal for a goy, And he asked Rav Shaul Lieberman, he said, but what, if my life was in danger on Shabbat, wouldn't you save me? Even not Mishum Eva, right? Not just because you would be afraid. And he said, yes. And then later on, one of Rav Shaul Lieberman's Talmidim who witnessed this exchange, he said, really, that's what you told him, but that's not halacha. He says, yeah, I told him that Mishum Eva. I gave him that answer because I didn't want him to get angry and bring any kind of reprisal. So I told him that it wasn't Mishum Eva. Anyway, it's a complicated issue. Although, as I say, for practical purposes nowadays, it's not as complicated because it's generally accepted that you're going to save the person's life. All of this to say that this is all here to give us this idea of safek nefashot, that even we have various sfekot. So at the outset, I have all of the sfekot, right? It's a safek, right? Safek sham, safek eno sham. And even if I find him, maybe he's alive, maybe he's dead. And even if I find him alive, maybe he's a goy, maybe he's a Jew. Right? So it's a safek, al safek, al safek. So this is far from being a safek shakul, right? I have maybe a very small percentage chance that I'm going to save this person's life, but nonetheless, I do what I can to save their life. So actually, I think we'll stop here. Next time, we're going to look at the beginning of the Gemara, and I'll just read a little bit from the beginning from the next part of what we're reading, and then eventually, hopefully in the next few weeks, we're going to get to the part of the Gemara that talks more specifically about this last part of the mission that we're dealing with. But for the moment, I'm just going to read this part, and then we'll pick this up next time. So Tanu Rabbanan, we were in a Braita. From where would they know that person's eyes lit up? Right? It says, can you hear me?
Now we can. I lost
Okay.
you for a second.
Internet, I think, kind of. Yeah. Okay. So when you were reading about the bull moose, we feed Achi. So what is from the time for it bad? What does that mean? And with taste. And the implication is that how do I know that someone's eyes have lit up? It means that they can differentiate between something that tastes good and something that tastes bad. Again, we'll talk about this more next week. Tanu Rabbanan, of another bright on this, Mishachazo Bulmus, Machilino to Hakal Hakal. So somebody who has this affliction of bulmus, we feed him from the light, or from the easier, that is the less asur. And this is one of the sources that where the Mishnah is going to tell us that there are isurim, right? There's things that we're not allowed to eat, but they're not necessarily equal in terms of their level of isur. So, machilino to hakal hakal. And what would that be? So tevel in the Ve'la, so let's say you had to feed him something, and in front of you have tevel, and you have a nevela. What's tevel?
Produce from which Maaser has not been taken.
It's produce from which no matanot have been taken. So not truma, not trumat, right? Not truma, not maaser, not trumat maaser. Nothing has been taken. That's tevel. So you have tevel, which is an isur to eat from the Torah, or nevela. What's the definition of a nevela?
That's an animal that was not killed properly.
Yes.
Or-
Yeah. An animal that died not al yedei shlita kshera. That's really what in Chazal, that's what nevela means. It's an animal that died other than being slaughtered in a kosher fashion. So you have tevel and you have a nevela, you give him the nevela. That's the lesser yisur. If you have tevel and shvi'it, right? What's shvi'it?
That would be produce from the Shemitah year.
So this from the Shemitah year, which we have to define, because suppose during the Shemitah year you're allowed to eat. So when is Shvi'it Asur?
It was produce that was from land that was worked during the Shemitah year.
No, that would be no. It's talking. Well, Rashi here explains it to us, and he says, "Lachar zman habiur." Right at the end of the Shemitah, right after the Shemitah year, then you can still eat produce from Shemitah year, as long as that produce is still in the sadeh, right? It's still out in the wild, or it's in the fields. But once that whole season is over, then you're no longer allowed to eat it. You have to destroy it. So shvi'it after zman beyur. So if you have tevel and shvi'it, then you would feed them shvi'it. If you have tevel and truma, so truma, we know, right, is a gift to the kohen from produce. They are Tanai. That's a machoket Tanaim. The Tanya machirino to tevel, vein machirino to truma, benten omer truma velo tevel. Okay, so that's a good place to stop. It introduces us to this concept of hakal, that when you are in a position where the only thing you have to feed somebody is something that's asur, or possibly the doctor has prescribed something, maybe more than one thing that's asur, and he says you have to eat one of these two things. Then you go after whichever is kal, and we'll define what kal means next time. And then we'll also see the Gemara Rabbah goes into some detail about this. Okay, I think we'll stop here, and we'll deal with some of these difficult issues beginning next week. Any last questions, comments? So I wish everybody a Purim Sameach.
Thank you, Purim Sameach.
Purim Sameach.
Okay, and Michael, thank you, Michael Werner, thank you for hanging in there. To the extent that you were able to, thank you. All of you. Laila Tov.
Good night.
Laila Tov. יישר כוח.